The leaf miners are generally small insects that have larvae that are highly modified to feed inside leaves and needles of plants. In order to accomplish this task, the larvae are obviously flattened, and they often have extreme modifications of their mouth parts. These pests can also be very difficult to manage since the larvae are inside leaf tissues, and even some systemic insecticides may not reach the exact tissues being eaten. Leaf miner damage can be insignificant and cosmetic to severe, where plants can be entirely defoliated by the dropping of heavily mined leaves. This group could be covered taxonomically or by how the mines look. We'll use the way that the mines appear. The leaf miners are a large and diverse group of insects. Most can be easily identified by their characteristic mines made in host plant leaves or needles. Serpentine mines appear as winding trails that gradually get larger. Blotch mines appear as oval, round, glove, or star-shaped or irregular blotches on the leaf surface. Comma mines are made usually by agromyzid flies, but some beetle larvae and moth larvae also make comma mines. These mines start out as winding trails and end in a blotch. Agromyzid flies also produce diagnostic pinholes. Leaf miners attacking conifers are called needleminers. As leaf miner larvae burrow through the spongy parenchyma tissues of a leaf, they usually leave behind a frass trail and the upper and lower epidermis remains intact. The burrow is often white or yellow because of the loss of cells. However, the epidermal cells soon die and this turns the mine brown. Serpentine leaf miners are characterized as being winding trails that seem to be somewhat randomly made in the leaf. Some have diagnostic zigzag patterns and others follow major leaf veins or leaf margins. In this image, we can tell that this is a dipterous leaf miner because of the numerous small white spots on the leaf. These are the ovipositor punctures made by leaf mining flies. They are called pinholes, and we'll discuss them in greater detail later on. The larvae of beetles, moths, midges, and sawflies can make general leaf mines that we call blotch mines. These appear as irregular patches on the leaves. The blotches are first light green to white, but they soon turn brown as the epidermal tissues no longer have access to water and nutrients. Depending on the leaf vein architecture and the mining larvae, blotch mines can be circular, angular, glove-shaped, star-shaped, and even somewhat elongated. There are also leaf blotch diseases that can mimic leaf mines. By holding the leaf up to the light, one can usually see frass inside the mine. If necessary, tearing the leaf through the mine will reveal if the blotch is solid or has the upper and lower epidermis separated. Classic comma mines are made by flies in the family Agromyzidae. The eggs are inserted into the leaf tissues by the adult female. The first instar larvae makes a serpentine mine, but when it molts into the second instar, a blotch is made. This continues with the third instar larva. When the larva is mature, it will either pupate in the mine or cut a slit in the epidermis and drop to the ground to pupate. Another feature of the agromyzid flies is that the females use their ovipositors to punch holes in leaf tissues, back up, and feed on the juices that exude from the wound. These scars are called pinholes and are diagnostic features of this family. Some beetles, sawflies, and caterpillars can also have larvae that start out making a serpentine trail and then end up making a blotch mine. These don't produce pinholes. When insects mine the needles of conifers, they are called needleminers. Unfortunately, there are numerous needle diseases and conifer tip diseases that can produce brown needles and brown tips of junipers and Arborvitae. The needle miners can be easily confirmed by holding up the damaged needle to bright light. Frass pellets should be easily visible, and the caterpillars chew exit holes on one end of the mine, which should also be visible, at least with a hand lens. The Arborvitae miner is usually called a leaf miner rather than a needle miner because of the shape of the Arborvitae foliage. The Columbine leaf miner is one of the agromyzid flies, but this one has larvae that make serpentine mines rather than comma mines. When the adults emerge as the first Columbine leaves fully expand, they mate and the females start to mature their eggs by feeding on leaf juices. She uses her ovipositor to poke holes in the leaves, pushes it around to macerate the tissue, then turns around and uses her sponging mouthparts to dab up the liquids. I often ask students, what do you think the males eat? The answer is nectar and what's left over by the females. Basically, the males don't live very long. Most agromyzid flies are black with yellow markings, and they are the size of a small fruit fly that visits you in the kitchen. The larvae take a couple of weeks to finish their development. They then chew an exit hole in the mine and drop to the ground to pupate. New adults emerge in a week or two and repeat the life cycle again. The last larvae in the season pupate but remain until the next spring. Chemical control should target the first generation. A common greenhouse agromyzid leaf miner is one called the Serpentine leaf miner because it makes serpentine mines in dozens of different plant species. This species can also survive in the Gulf states where plants like philodendron can survive. In these images, taken in Florida, you can see the mines in the leaflets of this plant. This plant had a heavy infestation, and adult females had extensively pinholed a newly emerged leaf, probably because of the softer tissues. These leaves were so badly damaged they eventually dropped off as they tried to expand. Several leaf mining caterpillars also make serpentine mines. Many of these are in the family Gracilariidae, and the mine of the catalpa leaf is believed to be made by one of these moths. The small family Neptoleafminer contains iridescent moths that have larvae that make winding trails in the leaves of various deciduous trees. Once the larva matures, it cuts a slit in the epidermis, emerges, and drops to the leaf litter to pupate. Most of these leaf mining caterpillars do not create extensive damage in a season because most are attacked by tiny parasitic wasps. The Birch Leafminer is a European invasive pest that was first detected in North America in 1923. It commonly attacks gray and paper birch and is less successful on river and European birches. This pest overwinters as pupae in the soil under host trees. When Van Hoot spirea begins to bloom and birch leaves are about 1/2 to 3/4 inch in length, the adults emerge. The tiny black females insert eggs into the young leaf tissues. Each female can lay eggs in several locations on a single leaf, as well as scatter eggs among many leaves. The eggs hatch in a week, and the larvae make a blotch mine. The larvae take 3 to 4 weeks to mature. They then emerge and drop to the ground to pupate. Heavy first-generation attacks often force host trees to set out a second flush of leaves. This can occur when the first-generation adults emerge. The new leaves provide ample soft tissues for oviposition to produce a second generation. In some locations and years, a third generation occurs. Heavy attacks can weaken birch trees that make them more susceptible to the bronze birch borer attack. Therefore, management of the first generation is critical to keep trees healthy. The most common sawfly leaf miners are the birch, hawthorn, alder, and elm leaf miners. All except for the hawthorn leaf miner are European invasive species. They are small sawfly species that overwinter as pupae in the soil under host plants. As the leaves begin to emerge in the spring, the adults emerge and females insert eggs into the leaf tissues with their needle-like ovipositors. The larvae generally make irregular blotch mines. Like the birch leaf miner, the European alder leaf miner has multiple generations in a season as long as there are new leaves emerging. The hawthorn and elm leaf miners only have a spring generation. The larvae take 2 to 3 weeks to complete their mines, then the larvae chew an exit hole, drop to the ground, and pupate. The hawthorn leaf miner can often cause severe aesthetic damage. I've selected the gregarious oak leaf miner as our example of a blotch mine making caterpillar. There are dozens of species of these leaf miners, with most trees having one or more species. In fact, oak trees have a solitary and gregarious leaf miner. Both are in the same genus, and the only difference is that the gregarious oak leaf miner often have several larvae in one mine. These overwinter as mature larvae in fallen leaves. When the oak leaves are fully expanded, the white, gray, and brown moths emerge, mate, and females attach eggs to leaves. The larvae burrow into the leaves and make blotch mines that can take about 3 weeks to complete. There can be 2 to 3 generations per year, and usually these are minor aesthetic pests. The black locust tree has 2 leaf miners. The locust leaf miner makes a blotch mine, and the digitate locust leaf miner makes a lobed blotch mine. The locust leaf miner is a small leaf beetle species, and the digitate mine is made by a small moth. The locust leaf miner is the most common on our black locust trees across North America. Actually, the blotch mines are a minor problem and are often missed. However, the adult beetles can do extensive skeletonization of the black locust trees, especially when the new beetles emerge in July and August. Infested trees can look like they have been scorched by severe drought. The adults overwinter and emerge in early spring to feed on a wide number of deciduous trees, especially oaks. The beetles lay eggs on black locust leaflets in late May, and the larvae mine during June. Larvae pupate within the mine, and the new adults in July will lay eggs for a second generation, especially if new locust leaves are still emerging. Second generation adults emerge in August and continue to skeletonize host leaves. The boxwood leaf miner is one of the midges that have larvae that can mine boxwood leaves. This species overwinters as half-mature larvae which finish feeding in the spring. In late April into early May, the larvae rasp a window in the leaf undersurface and then pupate. Upon emergence, the pupa pushes through the window and the orange adult midges emerge. After mating, the females locate newly emerged leaves. They then stand tall and wiggle the tips of their abdomens back and forth to insert eggs. The eggs hatch, and the burrowing first instar larvae cause the leaves to form extra tissues that look like tiny blisters. The larvae then remain dormant for the summer, only to resume feeding in September through early November. Damaged leaves drop early and can cause severe thinning in the boxwoods. Common boxwood is favored, but some cultivars are known to be resistant to this pest. If control is attempted, systemics are only effective at egg hatch and again in the September to October feeding period. The spotted tentiform leaf miner is a tiny caterpillar which mines the leaves of apple. The larva makes a blotch mine that appears as a blister on the lower leaf surface, but a patch of white dots are evident on the upper surface. There are several species of these tentiform leaf miners, and all make similar mines, with the upper leaf layer having the characteristic dots. The spotted tentiform leaf miner is most common on apple, including crabapple. Other species are common on oaks and maples, though none usually require controls. Many native leaf miners have predators and parasites that are often adept at locating their hosts within the plant leaves. The holly leaf miner attacks native and European holly leaves. There are several closely related dipterous leaf miners that attack different species of holly, such as inkberry and deciduous hollies. The adults can only feed when the leaves are not fully expanded and hardened. Thus, there is only one generation per season. Eggs are inserted into leaves that are about half expanded. The first instar larvae make little dash mark-like mines before entering summer dormancy or estivation for the summer. In the fall, the larvae resume feeding, making a larger trail. They then become dormant again in winter months. Finally, they complete their feeding by making a blotch in the spring. Upon finishing development, the larvae chew a hole in the leaf and attach the head of their puparium to the hole. This allows the adults to emerge, since the adult flies don't have chewing mouthparts. Extensive mining of leaves can cause early drop of leaves that normally stun the plants for 2 or more years. Control is also tricky, even with systemic insecticides, because of the 2 larval dormancy periods. There are several flea weevil species that attack ornamental trees and fruit trees. They are all in the genus Orchestes, and species occur on most continents. A recently introduced species is known as the elm flea weevil, that apparently came from the steppe region of Siberia. Adult weevils overwinter in leaf litter. They feed by making pit holes in the leaves. The females insert eggs in the mid-veins of leaves early in the spring, and the larvae make a linear mine to the leaf margin where a blotch mine is formed. The larvae pupate in a chamber within the mine. Upon emerging, the adults feed extensively on leaf tissues where the most noticeable damage occurs. Extensive pit feeding looks like leaf skeletonization. Other flea weevils attack apple, hornbeam, hawthorn, and alders. All have similar life cycles. The yellow poplar weevil is another weevil that attacks ornamental trees, primarily yellow poplar, which is also known as tulip tree. This weevil also attacks deciduous magnolia species, especially sweet bay magnolia. Adults overwinter under host trees. As new tree leaves expand, the weevils make bean-shaped holes in the leaves and mate. Females insert several eggs in the midvein of the leaves, and the larvae mine together to the leaf margin where they make a blotch mine. Here are more images of the yellow poplar weevil. The first one shows a female inserting eggs in a midvein, and the second image is a close-up of those egg scars. Once the larvae finish their development, they make cocoons with strange filaments. When the new adults emerge in late June, they often actively fly about their host trees and do some extensive feeding. At this time, the weevils may land on people, and their oval bodies and the way that their legs appear to be arising from the side of the body, they can appear somewhat tick-like. Folks often report that they have encountered a flying tick at this time. Like the elm flea weevil, the feeding by the newly emerged weevils can be pretty extensive, causing browning of the tree leaves. This is called maturation feeding, where the weevils are making the fat body that they will need to overwinter successfully. There are several pine and spruce needleminer species. The pine needle miners are tiny species, and the larvae generally mine the tips of needles. The pine needle miner attacks several hard pines in northeastern North America. The adults emerge in late June and early July to mate and lay eggs on needles. The larvae mine one needle, then emerge and burrow into a second needle. When they reach the fourth instar, the larvae remain dormant for the winter. They finish feeding by the end of May and pupate within the mine. Spruce needle miners are tortricids, and their larvae mine many needles. Most species have the habit of securing mined needles with some silk to the branch. The common species have 2 to 3 generations per summer. The attacked mined needles usually results in unsightly brown patches on branches. In some years, the infestations can be so severe that all the internal branches are covered with the mined needles. The Arborvitae and cypress leaf miners are really needle miners, as they attack these conifers which have short, scale-like needles. All are small moths with larvae that feed within the tips of host trees. The damage can often look like winter freeze damage, summer scald, or even some fungal tip diseases. If you pick off the affected tips and try to peel back the surface, you should find that the stems are hollow and often filled with frass pellets. Weather damage or disease will leave behind solid but dead stems. The Arborvitae leaf miners are larvae that mine the tips of Arborvitae and junipers from mid-July until October, when they become dormant for the winter. They resume feeding in the spring and pupate in late May. The adults emerge in late June to lay more eggs. I plan to discuss pest management in greater detail later in the course. I want to take some time to discuss management of leaf and needle miners. If you paid attention, I've pointed out that some of the leaf miners prefer some species or varieties of plants and avoid others. American whitebark birch is much more susceptible to the Birch Leafminer than European birch. American elms are much less preferred by the elm flea weevil. So, selecting species and cultivars that are less preferred is a good option. Many of the leaf miners, especially native species, usually have several parasitic wasps that attack the larvae. These should be conserved by not applying insecticides at the time that these parasitoids are active. Without a doubt, insecticide treatments can be very effective, and there are 2 approaches to their use. Contact insecticides are very effective if used when the adult leaf miners are flying and laying eggs. The larvae of leaf miners can often be killed using systemic insecticides, but the larvae have to be actively feeding.